This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Devastating landslides leave 42 people dead in Cameroon. Flooding displaces thousands in the Central African Republic, Somalia and Kenya. And in the UK, Parliament votes for a December 12th election, paving way for grueling campaigns. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program. Relatives of the victims of the Ethiopian plane crash condemned the Boeing 737 MAX as unsuitable to fly again. And in sports, Caitlin Roskans becomes the first female South African gymnast to qualify for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics in over a decade. A landslide in Cameroon has killed at least 42 people. The incident happened on Tuesday in the western city of Bafoussam. According to a local authority, the landslide was caused by heavy rains. The country's President Paul Biya offered his condolences to families of the victims. Several of Cameroon's neighbors have also been experiencing intense rainfall and flooding. Search and rescue operations are ongoing. The Central African Republic is experiencing the worst flooding in 2 decades. Torrential rains have left at least 28,000 people homeless. The government has called it a huge natural catastrophe.
10 days of heavy rain have left parts of the Central African Republic flooded. The rains caused the banks of the Ubangi River and its tributaries to flood. Thousands have lost their homes.
The island started to immerse itself in water. After that, our house collapsed. We lost everything, all the plates, all the equipment, and the house collapsed. All is lost. Even the fishing equipment is all lost. We've lost everything. We have nothing now, not even money. We're exposed. We have come all the way here seeking for well-being.
The country's president, Faustin Archangel Touadera, visited some of the devastated sites. As floodwaters rise, concerns are growing of waterborne diseases such as cholera spreading. Aid organizations are on the ground to assist with the displaced.
We are not taking the lead. We are here to register the victims. The government is taking the lead. That's why you saw the ministers, the government members here. And it was the government that decided to move the women, to keep them safe until temporary housing was built and to bring them back.
The flooding has put a strain on a country already dealing with instability since the 2013 civil war. Astatal, CGTN.
And as parts of the Central Africa region and the East African experience flooding, concerns are growing over a worsening drought situation in various parts of South Africa, with some municipalities demanding the government declare it a national disaster. The crippling drought has led to water shortages. At least 4 provinces have been warned to reduce their water consumption rate by at least 530 million litres per day or face stringent restrictions. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
South Africa is facing a water crisis. Many cities and towns in the country do not have enough water to satisfy demand, and taps are expected to run dry unless drastic action is taken. A crippling drought, coupled with scanty contingency plans, has left already thousands without water.
Well, the situation is quite dire. When we consider the fact that last year at this time, our average national dam levels was at about 73%. At the moment, it's somewhere between 60-61% and so on. So you can see the difference there is quite huge. That's the one thing. Secondly, we are seeing, I think, easily worse high temperatures than we experienced a year ago, implying that the evaporation rates in our dams and our rivers is quite excessive.
The Water and Sanitation Ministry says a number of other factors are contributing to this current state. These include less rain, which is aggravated by droughts and climate change, population growth and higher water use by industry, aging infrastructure, pollution and water wastage because of leaking pipes and taps. South Africans are urged to help alleviate the situation.
There are a few things that we can do, from the household, for instance, to make sure that we do not have taps that run off, without anybody being responsible to switch them off or whatever. There are these little things called washers in the taps. They are rubber things. They from time to time, they get finished, just like when you take a car for service or something. If it doesn't work properly, there's going to be leakage. Any kind of leakage in the household can be attributable to high water use. We could be able to save a lot of potable water by reusing and recycling our waters from the washing machines and so on and so forth.
The Water and Sanitation Ministry is expected to present a master plan next month on how government will deal with this. For now, this already bad situation might worsen. The South African Weather Services has warned that the current heat wave is likely to continue in large parts of the country. This means that thousands of South Africans are going to experience high levels of water shortages due to the increasing water usage. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Well, the UK is gearing up for a general election with Brexit front and centre. The House of Commons voted for an early election to be held on December the 12th, and the House of Lords is expected to approve the move. CGTN's Richard Bestick has been following this vote since Tuesday. He's now joining me live from London. Richard, a pre-Christmas election for the first time in generations. How did the night end after the vote?
Well, we now are in a situation where the parties are readying themselves for what is the most unpredictable and possibly most contentious general election in a generation. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson ended his day telling his ranks of members of Parliament that it was going to be a tough election, and pretty much everyone agrees with that. It could be a measure, or at least give us evidence of what impact Brexit has had on Britain's two-party system of politics, whether British politics will be transformed permanently by Brexit, because it's no longer a two-party conflict. The election was triggered by a combination of the Scottish nationalists and an opposition party with 19 MPs called the Liberal Democrats, effectively bouncing the Labour Party into supporting it. And on his fourth attempt, Boris Johnson was able to secure the election that he's wanted for so long. But it's not just Parliament which has been brought to a standstill by Brexit. No party with enough votes to force it to force any kind of resolution on Brexit, but in the country as well, there is a feeling that four parties are now contesting. Allegiances are along the lines of where you stand with Brexit rather than party allegiances. And one other thing, Beatrice, nobody knows just what kind of mood this a general election will have. Over the last few months in Parliament and in the country, there has been an increasingly toxic atmosphere. There are fears that that toxic atmosphere might be transported from Parliament and the streets into the general election. So a lot lies ahead and a lot is unknown.
So, Richard, a lot lies ahead, a lot is unknown, the mood is unknown. You've described it as unpredictable and contentious election, and exactly what impact Brexit has had on this election. Give us the likely scenarios, though, that are likely to come out of this election.
Well, everybody wants to win it for different reasons. Boris Johnson wants to secure a majority so that he can force through his image of Brexit. The Scottish nationalists and the Liberal Democrats want to, if not get a majority of their own, get enough of a slice of the parliamentary cake that they can put together a coalition that can stop Brexit in its tracks. And then the Labour Party have a very complicated message to take out to the country, along the lines of they'll put together a new deal, go back to the European Union, hope the European Union once again reopens negotiations, and then take that to the people. They, though, say that they will be fighting along the lines of the other important issues, the economy, the health service, law and order. They'll be taking those issues to the country as well. But at the end of the day, this could decide whether Britain gets Boris Johnson's fairly hard form of Brexit through, or whether the last 3.5 years have been entirely wasted time and the opposition parties form a government, get rid of Brexit, and we're back to where we were before the referendum. We'll see. There is a long 5 weeks of campaigning to go, and an awful lot can happen in that time.
So, Richard, 5 weeks of campaigning to go now, and it is also expected to be a cold winter. Schools might be busy with end-of-year activities. Politicians will now just have over a month for campaigns. What is the reaction in London about all this?
Well, among the people, I think there's little doubt that people are thoroughly fed up to the back teeth with Brexit, and that's why Boris Johnson's slogan, "Let's just get Brexit done," resonates so well with the wider population. People want to see the back of Brexit. But you pointed out there that it's going to be the first winter election, first December election in very nearly a century. The result of that election 100 years ago, by the way, was no majority at all, a hung parliament. If that happens, we're right back to where we started, and nobody will be able to force through anything on Brexit at all. So this election, although critical, contentious, unpredictable, could actually be a damp squid. It could prove to be nothing at all, no resolution to Brexit, if no single party emerges as the single strongest force. The people of Britain will probably resent the idea that they have to go out at the coldest and darkest time of year. You remember Boris Johnson said he'd have us out of the European Union, do or die, by the end of October, a Halloween Brexit. Well, maybe the population being forced out onto to vote in December will punish him for his rash words. It's no easier for the leader of the main opposition party, the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. He is the most unpopular party leader, opposition leader, since opinion polling began in this country. So he has a massive hill to climb. They will be going out, they will be trying to win over with their arguments, but this, at the end of the day, Beatrice, is a very high-risk strategy from the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
All right, Richard Bestick joining us there live from London. Thank you. Now, Greece is once again calling for support to handle the influx of migrants and refugees. The Prime Minister says they cannot carry the problems of 3 continents. Greece has the biggest resurgence in refugee arrivals since 2015. That's the year when more than 1 million people crossed into Europe from Turkey via Greece. Since then, it has repeatedly called for a cohesive policy among the European Union partners for an equitable distribution of the challenges from the refugee and migration crisis. The government has also vowed to streamline what it sees as a lengthy asylum process and facilitate the deportation of rejected asylum seekers. But it has not been well received by human rights groups. A lengthy bill on the matter is on the agenda for discussion in Parliament this week.
My country is, particularly in the past few months, experiencing an influx of migrant and refugee flows disproportionate to its size and population. Our outlying islands are suffocating, and areas in the mainland with hosting facilities are dealing with the first problems. We control our borders and always take care of the world's persecuted, but one country alone cannot carry the problems of 3 continents on its shoulders. It takes more cooperation to fight the criminal networks of illegal migrant trafficking in order to stop this vulgar trade of hope from those who violate not only formal but also ethical laws.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan to meet in Washington next week for mediation over the Grand Renaissance Dam. And after the death of ISIL leader al-Baghdadi, we look at the possible impact on militancy in North and West Africa.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that the person who was to replace ISIL leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has also been killed by American forces. The supposed successor's name has not been released, but in North and West Africa, the killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is rekindling debates about the future of terror groups there. Joining me now live from Lagos is Deji Badmus with the situation regarding the killing of Abu Bakr. Deji, thank you for joining us. Let's start off with this recent situation. The U.S. says that the person who was to replace the ISIL leader has also been killed by American forces. What is the impact, though, of the death of Abu Bakr on extremism on the continent?
Well, Beatrice, regional African leaders are watching very closely to see what impact the death of the ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi would have on the activities of terrorists in both the Sahel and Sahara. And the reason is because a number of the jihadist groups operating in the 2 regions have for long sworn allegiance to ISIS. One example is Boko Haram, a faction of it known as Islamic State West African Province, which has been very active lately around the Lake Chad Basin region, carrying out attacks mainly on hard targets. Authorities in Nigeria especially would be hoping the death of al-Baghdadi could be a game changer in the country's counterinsurgency operation and possibly spur troops to make a final push to get Abu Bakr Shekau, the elusive leader of Boko Haram. For at least 2 years now, Nigeria, Chad, Niger and Cameroon have been battling a faction of Boko Haram known as Islamic State West African Province, ISWAP, an affiliate of ISIS.
It's a testament to the far-reaching influence al-Baghdadi wielded before his death. And now that he's no more, security analysts say now is the best time for troops of the affected countries to seize the momentum.
We must be strategic and apply, appropriate tactical measures to, like I said, leverage on the death. What's the psychology of the fighting troops at this point? Leverage on the death and finish them once and for all. The death of al-Baghdadi creates a very, very good, chance for the governments in affected countries to, eliminate, decimate the terrorist group. Because the morale of the local fighters of Boko Haram will have dropped now drastically with the death of al-Baghdadi. So, and there's going to be a disconnect in command between, the local fighters and the ISWAP support group.
A number of local terrorist groups across the Sahel had also sworn allegiance to the late al-Baghdadi, carrying out series of deadly attacks in places like Mali and Burkina Faso. But al-Qaeda still continues to hold sway in the region. So any impact of the death of al-Baghdadi on terror activities in the region may simply be zero.
Security agencies must be on top of their job. They must rely on partnership with sister countries that are having borderline in the Sahel. All of the countries, they should push away their misunderstandings and look towards a good and strong relationship building, intelligence sharing, and coordinated attacks to hone in and expunge the activities of the terrorist groups.
The death of al-Baghdadi has again stirred up discussions in Nigeria on the leader of Boko Haram, Abubakar Shekau. He's managed to evade Nigerian military and that of Chad, Niger and Cameroon for close to 10 years now. Some think the death of al-Baghdadi should serve as a game changer in the hunt for Shekau.
This is a task shelved on the shoulders of Nigerian security agencies to see how they can quietly and codedly get him eliminated to cause the necessary disruption that will expunge their presence.
Authorities in both the Sahel and Sahara would desperately wish al-Baghdadi's death will take the sail off the wings of the terror groups linked to him and ISIS and kill their morale to continue their terror activities in the regions. But they know better not to think that could be a reality. Beji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Beji Badmus there in Lagos, looking at the impact of Islamic extremism in the West African region. Well, let's now go to Cairo, where Adel Mahroui will also look at the impact of this. Adel?
Well, Beatrice, the situation here has been announced. Washington, D.C. announced Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's death as a great achievement. But in fact, the great achievement which may stall the group's leadership or the group itself to choose and elect a new leader, there is an implication on the ground. And with the management ISIL has, some analysts say it is very unlikely that his death will affect their operation on the ground. Since 2013, Cairo has devoted its military might to fight the group in North Sinai. While that has seen some achievements in terms of the number of attacks, the impact itself of ISIL still exists and it still does some operations. I've talked to two analysts to see exactly how they think ISIL's leader's death, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, will impact Egypt's fight against the group in the Sinai.
In Egypt, ISIL's affiliated militants have called themselves the Sinai Province. It's a collection of terrorist groups unified under one name and one management. Analysts believe that Washington's announcement of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's death won't have a major impact in Egypt.
ISIL will not be like Al-Qaeda. It won't die with the death of its leader. It has created a sort of federal structure. Baghdadi was the head of it, but each group has its own management. They don't depend on Baghdadi for support. He depended on the allegiance. When we'd categorize the strength of the Sinai province among other ISIL groups, Sinai would be in the 7th place, thanks to the military campaigns against it.
أو المرتبة السادسة وفق السوابق يعني دي المرة الثالثة.
It's not the first time Baghdadi's death is announced. Previously, he personally announced that he was alive. That has shaken the trust in the information announced by the Americans. No matter how accurate it is, some of his followers will still not believe it and will operate normally. I think ISIL fighters are getting relocated and planning for attacks.
To its followers and militants, al-Baghdadi will only be considered dead once the group announces it through an obituary. And while his death won't have a great effect on ISIL's arm in Egypt, an opportunity could arise for the authorities to end them.
The bet is on a division among the Sinai province militants. If the group gets divided on which new leader to support, that would be a great benefit to the Egyptian armed forces. They could get divided into small self-governed groups, and that makes them an easier and vulnerable target. If the group remains united, though, challenges will remain as they are.
Experts warn of possible terrorist attacks taking place in Africa, Europe, or Asia. If ISIL declares its leader dead and starts the process to select a new leader, that could be considered a green light for its followers to retaliate. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, in 2016, about 14,000 premature deaths in Kenya were attributed to indoor air pollution. Dirty air is a leading risk factor for early death in Kenya, where households continue to cook with firewood or charcoal. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa is here with me after a trip to Siaya County in Western Kenya. Wilkista, what did you find in Western Kenya?
Well, during our trip to Western Kenya, what we found is that a number of households, a sizable fraction of households, do use firewood and charcoal, and this does predispose them, it does expose them to the risks of developing different conditions because of their exposure to these fuels. And we also found that there are a number of scientists who are trying to address this, and one of them was trying to address this by harvesting hyacinth and trying to use it to create a biofuel, which would then be more affordable and which would also be available because the raw material is easily and readily available in Kisumu. And he is just one of a number of people who are working to just provide cleaner fuels to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. This is his story in this report that we filed when we were in Kisumu. In a little room deep inside Yala in Western Kenya, one man's dream rose to life. And so begins the process of turning the water hyacinth plant into ethanol fuel. The process is simplified for the little workshop, a process that has taken years of research to master. A few years ago, Richard Arwa, a secondary school chemistry teacher, entered a science contest with his students. Their idea was to use organic waste to make clean energy in the form of bioethanol. They chose the water hyacinth that is choking the Lake Victoria as their raw material.
There are other sources, as you put it, the sorghum, there is cassava, maize can do it, all that. But these are food crops. So the food crops, that means we'll be competing to get them. That means we'll buy them at a high cost. But we settled on water hyacinth one because it's readily available. It is cheap.
They didn't win, but like the hyacinth they used, the idea took hold. Today, casual workers harvest the hyacinth plant and ferry it to Richard's workshop. Richard and his workers then remove the parts they don't need, shred the rest, ferment it, filter it to rid it of solids, and finally distill it to get ethanol. The clear liquid means the process has been successful.
7 tons of water hyacinth should be able to give you something like 550 liters of ethanol.
A liter of the fuel sells for $1 and cooks for 6 hours. As the world searches for solutions towards clean, renewable energy in Western Kenya, one scientist hopes to change the attitudes of his neighbors. However, changing their mindsets is an uphill task. Richard's product isn't on sale in his neighborhood, where locals mostly use charcoal and firewood to cook. This despite the World Health Organization's findings that dirty air remains a leading risk factor for early death in Kenya. Instead, Richard's fuel has found its way to Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya's north. And in coming months, once he secures funding, he hopes to increase production.
Nothing is absolutely waste. Nothing is absolutely bad. Everything that we see as a problem, let's try to look for the opportunity aspect of it.
His isn't the only idea of this kind, but he is one in a growing number of entrepreneurs working to produce clean, green and safe fuel. Wilkis Anyawo, CGTN.
So, Wilkista, this is supposed to be used as an alternative form of energy for firewood and charcoal, which is one of the most used energy supplies in most parts of rural Kenya. How available would this bioethanol be for those common people who are currently using the charcoal and the firewood?
Well, at this point, it isn't available to a number of people who would want it yet, because he is producing it at a small scale. He is a teacher. He still continues to teach, and therefore he hasn't been able to scale it up to the level that he would want to. However, he is hoping to get some funding so that he will be able to then expand his operations. But it also means just sensitizing the local community about the importance of using this fuel, because they are used to charcoal, they are used to firewood, and they do believe that these other forms of fuel cook faster. So it is a matter of making it available to the local community once he gets those funds, but also just telling them, teaching them about the benefits, including the fact that it does take the hyacinth a little bit, not so much hyacinth, but it does take a little bit of hyacinth from the lake, which has been a problem.
All right, definitely much needed cleaner energy for parts of rural Kenya. Wilkis Anyawo with me here in studio. Thank you. Well, let's now go to Egypt, where the country has confirmed it will take part in mediated talks in Washington next month over a controversial dam Ethiopia is building on the Nile. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had also emphasized that negotiations would be the best way to resolve the issue. The Nile is a lifeline supplying both water and electricity to the 10 countries it runs through. Addis Ababa insists it is necessary to provide the country with much-needed electricity, but Egypt fears it could drastically stem the flow of the Nile. Egypt depends on the Nile for around 90% of its water supply.
Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia will meet in the United States on the 6th of November in attendance of the representatives of the U.S. administration to break the deadlock in the ongoing negotiations regarding the Renaissance Dam.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Relatives of the victims of the Ethiopian plane crash in March condemn the Boeing 737 MAX as unsuitable to fly again.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
U.S. lawmakers have accused Boeing's chief executive of helping to cover up safety flaws that led to 2 fatal plane crashes. Dennis Muilenburg gave evidence to Congress on Tuesday, a year after the first of 2 Boeing 737 MAX disasters. And while he wanted to repeatedly apologize for the mistakes, lawmakers instead demanded answers and accountability. CGTN's Owen Fairclough has more from Washington.
The families of those killed in 2 identical Boeing crashes face to face with the head of the company appearing before a U.S. congressional inquiry.
We are sorry. Deeply and truly sorry. I think about you and your loved ones every day, and I know our entire Boeing team does as well.
Dennis Muilenburg testified on the first anniversary of a Boeing 737 MAX crash off the coast of Indonesia, before another in Ethiopia 5 months later. 346 lives lost and floors with technology called MCAS, designed to prevent mid-air stalls, at fault for both.
And the people who are...
And some lawmakers accuse Boeing of hiding those flaws.
These loved ones never had a chance. They were in flying coffins as a result of Boeing deciding that it was going to conceal MCAS from the pilots.
The premise that we would lie or conceal is just not consistent with our values.
The 737 MAX remains grounded worldwide, 371 aircraft in total, with no exact date for when regulators will allow them in the air again. Boeing has been accused of cutting corners in a rush to bring the 737 MAX to market as part of a battle with European rival Airbus to dominate smaller passenger jets. But the company denies this and says when the 737 MAX returns to the skies, it will be one of the safest aircraft ever. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Well, relatives of the victims of the Ethiopian plane crash say they do not believe the 737 MAX can fly safely and have dismissed the apology from Boeing's chief executive. The grieving families made the comments after Muhlenberg faced an intense grilling by U.S. lawmakers. This is the most high-profile congressional scrutiny of commercial aviation safety in years. It heaps pressure on a new Boeing senior management team fighting to repair trust with airline customers and passengers shaken by an 8-month safety ban on the Boeing 737 MAX. The model has suffered 2 crashes, one in October of last year and the other in March of this year. In total, the 2 crashes claimed the lives of 346 people.
Well, I'm not a technical expertise on all this, and I believe that at some point the regulators will allow it to fly. But I believe that the plane should not be flying again, and that's why I'm here, to listen to what Muhlenberg would say. He is a father, and he's a husband. I always wonder why, as a father and a husband, he did not put himself in the shoes of the 189 families that lost their loved ones in the first crash. Because if he did that, he would have called for the grounding of the 737 MAX in November. Dennis Muhlenberg needs to take the responsibility over the deaths of 346 people. It's one thing to say that we take responsibility over the installation of MCAS. It's another thing to say we take responsibility over the deaths of 346 people. That's what I want to hear him say.
I don't care for Mr. Muhlenberg's remorse. I don't know what he feels inside. I get my solace from my friends and my family, not from the people who caused the death of my sister and the other 346 people. I thought that he had his talking points that he went through with his lawyers beforehand, and he stuck to them fairly well. There were a couple of admissions, especially by the chief engineer, of mistakes that they'd made, of the pilot response time of 3 seconds that they'd assumed that was an error.
The Reserve Bank in Zimbabwe plans to introduce new notes and coins as the Zimbabwean dollar in the next 2 weeks. The move is the latest step towards restoring the domestic currency. The new money, consisting of $5 notes and $2 coins, will be introduced gradually to avoid driving up inflation. It will circulate alongside the bond notes and coins introduced in 2016 as a surrogate for US dollars, which the country has been using. The central bank unexpectedly reintroduced the Zimbabwean dollar on June the 24th, ending a decade of dollarization. Zimbabwe had abandoned its own currency in 2009 after it was wrecked by hyperinflation. And staying in a southern African area, South Africa's Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, has released a special paper on Eskom. The document sets out a roadmap for the public utility in a reformed electricity supply industry. Angelo Coppola has more.
Gordhan was speaking to media and electricity stakeholders in Pretoria. The plan has taken months to see the light of day. In that time, a senior executive has been appointed to manage the split of the utility into 3 business units, and a CEO has resigned.
We have to resolve the operational issues. At the same time, we need to shift towards the new business model and create the transmission entity and the generation clusters as we are talking about them. and resolve some of the cost issues within Eskom itself, whilst looking at the question of a new leadership within Eskom and a resolution to the debt issues, which my colleague, the Minister of Finance, will address as we go forward.
The 56-page document was published on Tuesday. It's a special paper and not a policy document or implementation plan.
I think this is a very broad framework, and there's still a lot of detail that has got to go in, a lot of detail work that has still got to be done in order to flesh out. So I see this more as a broad framework rather than a detailed implementation plan.
While the plan was being developed, Gordon and Ministers Mantashe from the DMRE and Ibrahim from DTI have been meeting with coal producers and suppliers for the past couple of weeks. This in order to find common ground on pricing. Gordon says that 7 of the producers are earning 100% profit margins.
I'm optimistic that this is all possible, and what it requires is for all the different stakeholders that are connected to Eskom in one way or another, whether you are a coal supplier or a technology supplier or working within Eskom or other interested parties, all of us will have to make a contribution for this project to succeed.
We have a special paper that's in the public domain. We have a 440 billion rand debt pile, and we have a deadline of 30 March to see Eskom get turned around. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
South Africa's Deputy President David Mabuza is currently in China on an official visit. Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan and Mabuza will co-chair the 7th plenary session of the China-South Africa Binational Commission. The commission was established in 2002 to serve as a strategic platform to address issues of common interest such as trade promotion and economic exchange. CGTN's Elisanja Mela has more.
For over 2 decades now, the two countries have had good relations. Those relations have developed from a partnership to a strategic partnership and then to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The arrival of South Africa's Deputy President in China for the Binational Commission further symbolizes the solidification of the relationship.
The state of our relationship with China started very long before democracy in South Africa. They supported us politically as we fight for democracy. They have helped us to achieve our democracy and the state where we are.
This bilateral platform will be preceded by engagements between the political leadership of the two countries.
We've got a big forum that's supposed to sit, which is called South Africa-China Binational Commission. In that commission, the commission has been established in 2002 for both countries to have a round table to sit around and discuss issues of common interest, especially economic issues and political issues.
The Deputy Minister says South Africa and China are working closely in promoting mutually beneficial relations at both continental and global stage.
We are looking forward for economic relations on areas of trade, on areas of agriculture, on areas of environment, on areas of ocean economy, because we feel both of us have got interest in those areas. So that's where we need to strengthen our bilateral. And also the report will tell us how far we went in all those areas and what is it that we can put more so that we take the process forward. Because our relationship is not an ending one, it's an ongoing one.
China is South Africa's largest trading partner, while South Africa is China's largest trading partner on the African continent. Elisanja Mela for CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Tunisia's energy deficit last year reached 52% compared with 49% recorded the year before. That's according to the energy minister of the North African economy. Slim Feriani says the deficit could reach 73% by 2030 as demand for energy increases. CGTN's Adnan Chauchi with the details.
The minister indicated the deficit can reach 73% in 2030 if the national resources stand still and the demand for energy keeps rising.
We need to take action against this state of emergency, especially since this deficit burdens both the budget deficit and the trade balance of Tunisia.
In 2018, the total amount of subsidy to the energy sector reached around $950 million, exceeding the 7% of the state budget, in addition to hydrocarbon imports, which account for 1/3 of the trade deficit.
To cope with this situation, Tunisia is firmly committed to a long-term energy transition policy, aiming towards an energy-efficient, diversified system less dependent on fossil fuels while contributing to the socio-economic and environmental development of the country.
The Tunisia Energy Reform Plan project was launched in July 2019, intending to help the country accelerate its energy transition.
It aims to support Tunisia's creation of favorable conditions to restructure the energy sector, noting that the restructuring actions also concern hydrocarbons, electricity, and energy management.
Authorities and experts conducted a diagnosis of the energy field by identifying weaknesses, opportunities and threats related to the energy sector, as well as public enterprises under supervision. The different departments at the Energy Ministry, as well as the Premier's advisors, aim to develop a thorough vision of the energy sector and its institutions and to propose instructions to improve their activity. Adin Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Cairo Art Exhibition places modern art next to the heritage of historical sites.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
An arts exhibition has been held in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, bringing a touch of modernity to the heritage sites of old Cairo. Here's CGTN's Ashtatal.
Cairo's Islamic heritage has for a long time contrasted with its people's contemporary vision. An exhibition featuring contemporary artwork by 28 Egyptian artists has been held across Cairo. The exhibition seeks to blend the past with the present in an attempt to shed light on the country's historical setting. Prominent historian and artist Huda Lutfi was part of the historic project.
This is the ward for the disturbed in the big hospital of Qalawun. And when I came first to visit it, I liked the abandoned space and the energy that it evoked.
Another visual artist, Amir Youssef, built and exhibited a kinetic sculpture meant to stimulate the viewer's sense of space and movement.
Actually, I started working on this piece when I found out that there was an exhibition organized by Art de Egypt largely in Bayat al-Suhami. My main focus was to try and produce a piece or a kinetic sculpture based on the area, which can show in some way the landmark of the setting or its architecture.
It's a cultural message that our art has not died. Modern art can coexist in the same places of the beautiful Islamic buildings of the 14th and 15th centuries.
The exhibition attracted an array of guests, including the French and Swiss ambassadors to Egypt, representatives of UNESCO, the UNDP, and the International Organization for Migration. Astata, CGTN.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Caitlin Rooskrantz becomes the first female South African gymnast to qualify for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics after the nation's lack of a representative in over a decade.